I didn't sit down and decide to make this. It came to me the way some things do, as a craving that wouldn't leave me alone. Green apples and onions. And at first I thought, now why in the world do I want that? But I've learned not to question certain urges too hard. Because not everything that calls you is about hunger. Some of it is about memory. Some of it is about instinct. Some of it is something older than you reminding you that it's still here. The older I get, the more I realize my hands know things my mind never studied. I don't reach for recipes like I used to. I don't measure the way I was taught. I taste, I pause, I listen, and I trust that if I slow down enough, I'll remember what to do. Not because I learned it in a book, but because I watched it long before I even tried to name it. I grew up around kitchens where nobody announced they were teaching you anything. You just stood there. Sometimes you were in the way, sometimes you were handed a spoon or told to peel something, and all the while life was happening out loud. People talk about who is here and who is gone, who was sick, who wasn't speaking to who had done wrong, and who was praying on it. And through it all, the pot stayed moving. Those pots stayed jumping. That's one thing the kitchen taught me early. Even grief doesn't stop dinner from happening. You can be hurting and still need to eat. You can be tired and still need to feed people. So the food learned how to carry more than just flavor. It learned how to hold emotion. It learned how to be steady when everything else felt shaky. Apples and onions make sense to me for that reason. They're not show off food, they're old food. They come from a time when sweetness wasn't saved for later and onions weren't just seasoning. They were how you made something simple feel like enough. They were how you softened what was sharp and stretched what was scarce, sweet and strong together, because that's how most days came anyway. Pork has always felt like an honest food to me. It doesn't pretend. It lets you know when you're rushing. It lets you know when the pan isn't ready. And when you take your time, it gives back. There's a reason pork shows up in stories about both the struggle and celebration. It fed people through a lot. It remembers hands. It remembers patience. Cabbage is like that too. Cabbage doesn't waste anything. It takes what comes before it and turns it into something fuller. It gathers flavor, gathers history, gathers whatever's left behind, and makes sure it doesn't disappear. That kind of food teaches you something if you pay attention about survival, about care, about carrying more than just yourself. And let's not forget the biscuits. Biscuits were never meant to be fancy, they were meant to be useful. They show up warm and quiet and ready to hold whatever you don't want to lose. They're kind of a food that doesn't ask for praise, but sometimes ends up being what everybody reaches for. I used to think ancestors only spoke in dreams or signs or strange little moments you had to decode. But now I understand they speak in appetite too, in cravings that don't make any sense, and that's until you follow them up. They speak in combinations you weren't taught about, but somehow know, in hands that move with confidence when the mind hasn't caught up yet. Sometimes they're not trying to teach you something new. Sometimes they're just reminding you that you already belong to something, that you come from people who fed each other through hard times and good ones, that the kitchen was always a place where stories lived, even when nobody was writing them down. And when the food is right, when it tastes like something older than you, the room gets quiet. Not because there's nothing left to say, but because something has settled. Like everybody who needed to be there showed up, sat down, and stayed a while. But this also reminds me of something. It reminds me of a woman I knew growing up. Everybody had a different name for her, but nobody ever forgot her kitchen. She wasn't loud, she wasn't flashy, she didn't talk too much about what she'd been through, and if you tried to press her, she'd just smile and keep doing what she was doing. But you could always tell when life had been heavy on her because that's when the food got better. She never cooked the same thing, the same way twice. And when you asked her why, she'd say, because today ain't yesterday and tomorrow ain't promised. That was it.